I wonder this morning, how many of us have seen people whose faith has been shaken by a disappointment? They follow Christ and then something's come along and it's just shattered that faith that they had. I was interested to read that in the 16th century there was a Spanish nun, and this Spanish nun would go about doing God's work, riding on a horse, and one day her horse ditched her into a muddy puddle, and she's recorded to have said this: "Well, God, if that's how you treat your friends, no wonder you've so few of them." Over the last couple of weeks, I've received a number of requests for prayer from good Christian people who I've known for some time, who I've worked with, asking for prayer because some of them have become ill, living normally ill with COVID, living in parts of the world where vaccines are not readily available as they are here, and the treatments are not so good. Under those circumstances, how do we explain the situation when the prayers are not answered? Where it feels to people on the ground that actually God has let them down. How do we handle that? Many of us who've been brought up in various churches will have grown up with the idea that when we pray and ask for something, God, of course, sometimes says yes, and he answers our prayers. And if we keep a list of what we pray for, we might tick them off, and that's easy. We will have been told that sometimes God says no, and a number of us might have had the experience that we can look back on something we prayed for, and with hindsight later on, we've been glad it wasn't answered because, well, God knew best, so we can understand no. And the third option we'll have been taught is that, well, God sometimes says, wait. But how do we handle the situation where in the wait, the person we've prayed for dies? That's exactly the situation that we have here in our reading this morning from John's Gospel, chapter 11. We're continuing our series looking through John's Gospel at the lives Jesus has changed. Just to put it into context, John chapter 11 is a long passage. We had this problem last week, and it's not possible in the course of a service to read all of the passage. So we just had to take the end part this morning of a fuller story. And to put that story, our passage, into context of the whole story, well, Jesus had 3 friends in a place called Bethany, just outside of Jerusalem. There was 2 sisters, Mary and Martha, and their brother Lazarus. And the situation was that Lazarus had become ill. Mary and Martha had sent for Jesus, who was some way away, and Jesus hadn't gone. He'd waited. He'd stayed where he was. And just to give you a flavour of it, finally, he arrived. Well, Lazarus had been dead and buried for 4 days. And earlier on in the chapter, it says this: Martha was the first of the sisters to go and greet him, hearing that he'd arrived. And we read there, Martha said to Jesus, "Lord, if only you'd been here, my brother would not have died. But even now, I know that God will give you whatever you ask." Jesus told her, "Your brother will rise again." "Yes," Martha said, "he will rise when everybody else rises at the last day." Jesus told her, "I am the resurrection and the life. Anyone who believes in me will live, even after dying, and everyone who lives in me and believes in me will never die. Do you believe this, Martha?" "Yes, Lord," she told him. "I've always believed you are the Messiah, the Son of God, the one who has come into the world from God." just from that exchange, it's very clear that Martha was already a lady of faith. She believed in Jesus and who he was. She believed that one day there would be a resurrection. And Jesus seems to have used this opportunity and that conversation to draw out from her, to help her to put into words exactly what it is that she believed. She says, you are the Messiah. Yes, thinking about it, you are the Son of God. You are the one God has sent into the world. And Jesus in that exchange also helps her to make the connection between himself and the resurrection, that he is the one who brings about the resurrection. But actually, let's take a step back and think about it rationally for a moment. Did Jesus really put these two sisters through all the stress of this event just as a way of teaching them, just as a way of helping them to put into words what they believed? Well, where our passage picked up, or a section of the passage picked up the story, Mary goes to Jesus, and she has exactly the same question that Martha has. She says, Lord, if only you'd been here, my brother would not have died. Think about it. When these two sisters sent to Jesus, he could have immediately sent a message back. He could send a message back, yes, I am going to heal your brother. Because as the people there pointed out at the time, he'd made a blind man see. He was well capable of healing people. The people at the time said, surely this man could have saved Lazarus, given he cared so much for him. Jesus certainly could have said yes. Or he could have said no. He could actually have said to these two sisters, look, everybody gets their time. There will come a time when we all pass away. We know that. I'm afraid this is Lazarus' time. But never mind, you've got the hope of the resurrection. Now, people could have turned around and said, well, how would these sisters have known about the resurrection? That's maybe why he brought Lazarus back to life. There's a good argument for that, and clearly it helped to demonstrate the power that the resurrection is possible. But he didn't need to do that. Jesus could have said to them, and you keep your eye on me, because keep your eye on me, and I will show you later on that resurrection is possible. So we didn't have to have this event. Why the wait? Well, we could say, and it's a good point, that wait enabled other people to believe in him. The people at the time were told when Lazarus was raised from the dead, believed in Jesus. In fact, as Jesus prayed outside the tomb, having asked them to move the stone, did you catch what he said? Father, I know you always hear me. I don't need to speak it aloud to you. Why was he speaking it aloud? So that other people would hear. And certainly, that was part of the purpose. And people heard him say, so it helped convince people who were round about. Now, we're told many of those people believed. Clearly not all of them believed. And that's always the case. I mean, how many of us have had people say to us over the years, no, I don't believe in a God. But if I saw a miracle, then I'd believe. Probably they wouldn't. Because there were people there on that day who saw Lazarus raised from the dead and still didn't believe. In fact, some of those people then went to the Pharisees. And the meeting of the Sanhedrin, the Jewish leading council, was called because Jesus has raised Lazarus from the dead. And they were concerned. The religious leaders, the chief priests, the Pharisees, from the Sanhedrin, the Jewish ruling council, they were concerned because, well, Israel was an occupied nation. The Roman authorities gave them a good degree of autonomy. What they feared was that a sort of a popularist movement surrounding somebody like Jesus might have alarmed the Roman authorities, and all of their privileges, all of their freedoms would have been taken away. So they determined that they would execute Jesus. That was the moment that decision was made. The high priest, if you noticed in our reading, said, well, you don't understand. It is good that one person dies rather than a whole nation suffers. Where did the high priest get that idea from? Got it from God. We're told it was a prophecy. He prophesied, because he was high priest, he prophesied. He got a message from God. It's better that one person die than the whole nation suffered. And that is a significant part of this passage. That is what is unique to our understanding of this passage. Why did these sisters have to suffer as they did this ordeal? Because that was the moment where the Jewish ruling council, the Sanhedrin, decided that Jesus was to be executed. Yes, there was hostility to Jesus before. In verse 8, early on in this chapter, when Jesus is going to go back into Judea towards Jerusalem, that sort of area, his disciples said, oh, the last time you were down there, people were going to stone you. There was hostility. But it wasn't the authorities made the decision. The authorities, the Jewish ruling council, after the resurrection of Lazarus, made the decision there and then that Jesus was to be executed. Why did these two sisters have to go through the agony of the wait? Because actually, that decision was an essential part of God's plan. We know the key to the gospel is that Jesus came, God amongst us, to live amongst us, yes, to show his power, yes, to show how he cared, yes, but most critically, to go to the cross to die in our place. That necessitated the Jewish ruling council making that decision. In John's gospel, the moment they made that decision was following the resurrection of Lazarus. That was the critical turning point. Mary and Martha, at the time, could not have known that. They could look back and they say, yeah, going through that experience, it helped us to realise, even more than before, just who Jesus was. Yeah, going through that experience, yeah, it helped us to really believe, have confidence in the resurrection. But they could not have possibly realised the significance of what that event, the decision that was made, had. It was absolutely critical in terms of God's great plan. They could not have seen that. At the heart of this passage is really faith. Hebrews 11, verse 1, defines faith for us. It's the reality of what we hope for and the evidence of what we cannot see. These two ladies had a hope they were to hold on to, but they couldn't see. They couldn't see the reason for the suffering. They couldn't see what lay behind it. What this passage is to us as Christian believers today is really an encouragement to keep trusting, to keep on trusting when we can't see. On those occasions when all hope seems lost, and on those occasions when what we're going through doesn't seem to make any sense. I mentioned at the start of this talk that over the last couple of weeks I've received more prayers from people asking for prayer because somebody's ill, seriously ill. Good and godly people who've committed their lives to serving Christ over the last couple of years, in fact. I've heard of people who I've known in other parts of the world who've really served Christ, served their church, and the prayer has been, they've got COVID. Can we pray for their recovery? And a number of those people have passed away, leaving families and churches devastated. We're bound to ask the question, why? Why the wait? And the answer is, we don't know. Or more correctly, we don't know yet. But there will come a time when we see. We don't know yet because now we don't have the bigger picture. In this incident in our passage today, yes, Jesus clearly changed the life of Lazarus. He was ill, he died, Jesus stepped in, he was raised back to life. Not only that, he clearly changed the lives of Mary and Martha. They gained from the experience. Not only that, he changed the lives of some of those in the crowd who had seen and therefore believed. But most significantly of all, because of that event and the decision that was made, he changed the life of all of us. That was a critical event. Mary and Martha and those there could not have seen that. As Christian believers this morning, we have a hope. We have a hope that sees beyond, that goes beyond what we understand. When we're suffering difficult circumstances, when we can't understand the reason why, we should never consider it any less significant in God's great plan. We don't know what God, in the big scheme of things, is doing. We don't know what the difference, what we are going through, even though we won't understand it, can actually make in terms of God's great purpose.